When it comes to personal finance, saving your first $100,000 is an incredible milestone. But saving your first $100,000 is anything but easy. It takes a lot of discipline, it takes a lot of sacrifice, and it can take some time. In this video, I'm going to share the story of how I saved my first $100,000, including the steps that were taken to get there, how long it took, and any major sacrifices made along the way. And hopefully by sharing my story and my experiences, I can help offer some perspective as well as guidance for your journey towards financial freedom. My journey towards my first $100,000 really started the summer of 2013. I had just finished my first year of university. I was 18 years old and I had about $20 to my name. And at the time, I was desperately trying to get a job. I applied everywhere, to retail, to office jobs, anything, you name it. I just wanted to make some money because I was broke, and I got absolutely zero responses. It was one of those times in my life where I really felt the limitations of not having any funds. Not even the fact that I wasn't able to buy anything I wanted, but the fact that I just felt completely powerless because I was really limited in terms of choices. That was the time when I decided I never want to feel like this ever again. So after that summer, I spent a lot of time refining my skills. I perfected my resume. I went to a lot of interview workshops, and then I finally landed my first internship in the summer of 2014, working for a packaged foods company. And when I finally received my first paycheck of $1,311, I did what any sane 19-year-old would have done. I went to the mall. And within the first 2 hours of receiving my first paycheck, I was back to $0 net worth again. I guess I was just pretty shopping deprived after years of being broke and finally being able to buy the clothes and the stuff that I really wanted. But unfortunately and frankly, this was how the rest of my internship went. So at the end of 2014, my net worth was $0. And this cycle pretty much continued for the rest of my time in university. Each summer, I would work at an internship, and after each internship, all the money I made would somehow disintegrate into thin air because half of it was going into tuition and the other half would be going to this guy. After I graduated university in 2016, my first job was at a financial services company paying me 55,000 Canadian dollars a year. My bad spending habits though continued after I graduated. I was buying a lot of clothes, and overall I was just being kind of irresponsible with my money. But given all this, I miraculously was able to save about half of my income. And that's because of two major catalysts. Number one was because I didn't have any student debt. That's because I was paying for my tuition out of pocket when I was in school. And even though that was so painful to do with all the internship money I earned, it actually ended up with me not graduating with student debt, and this helped a lot in terms of saving money after I graduated. The other major catalyst was I lived with my parents. At this time, I was saving about $1,500 a month, and by the end of my first year after university, I had about $15,000. But my bad spending habits didn't actually change until over a year after I graduated university. Now, this was not any sort of overnight change. It happened very gradually. You see, when I was in university, I did internships, and those internships were temporary. So if I didn't like an internship, then it was over in 4 months. But my full-time job was a bit different than that because there was no end date to a full-time job. So about a year after graduation, this is when I really found it hard to get out of bed and go to work because I wasn't excited for my day-to-day, I saw no purpose in it, and the thought of wanting to quit my job was always on my mind. But as much as I wished I could quit my job, I couldn't at the time, mainly because one, I had absolutely no plan, so what in the world was I going to do if I quit? And two was because I didn't have enough savings to sustain me while I pondered about life with no plan. And that's when I had a bit of an eureka moment, because the key here was knowing that I didn't have any savings. I realized that having money is not about buying things. It's about having choices and options. It's about the freedom of living a life with purpose. And just the gradual understanding of that over time was the thing that made me calm down and discipline my spending. So this is when I started reading finance book after finance book. I started researching investments to grow my savings, and I made my best effort to cut expenses. Every Sunday night where I just felt depressed about the upcoming work week, or every Monday morning when I was just even more depressed about the work week, that would just provide extra motivation for me to grow my savings and my investments and learn more about personal finance so I can have more freedom and more choices available to me. And thus I made my first investment in the summer of 2017 when my mindset began to change. I had about $15,000 in savings at the time, and I put the majority of it in an S&P 500 index because I was new to investing and I just didn't know anything else. And since I cut my spending and started cutting my expenses, I was still living at home, I was able to increase my monthly savings to $2,500 each month. I did this for about a year, and by the summer of 2018, I had $40,000 in savings. By the beginning of 2019, I switched jobs, and my new job paid me $75,000 a year. With my salary increase and still living with my parents, I was able to put $3,500 away every single month. And I did this for another year, and by early 2020, my savings and investments were just shy of $80,000. I always told myself that I can quit my job when I have $150,000 saved up. That's enough for me to take some time off, ponder about life without a plan, and then think about what I want to do. Except I think we all remember what happened to the markets in March of 2020. Naturally, if you were invested in anything at that time, it probably would have taken a tumble. So basically overnight, my investments went from nearly $80,000 all the way back down to $50,000. And it didn't help that work just got busier and busier, and I was working longer hours than ever before, and I was just super exhausted all the time. So looking back, it might have been a bit of desperation at the time even, but this was one of those times where I actually made a huge bet. At the lowest point of the market, I sold my investments at a loss, and I liquidated everything, and I reallocated all of my funds into high-tech growth stocks. The reason why I did this was, one, I think the pandemic reminded us that life is short, and now more than ever, I wanted to free myself and make the most out of the time that I have. And number two is that I always wanted to get into high-tech growth stocks, but for a while, I always thought that their prices were unattainable, especially for me, who was a small retail investor with not a lot of capital to begin with. But it actually turned out to be a good bet because, as we know when we look back, 2020 was probably one of the best runs for tech stocks. And because of that, between April and July of 2020, my investments actually doubled. And in July of 2020, just shortly after my 26th birthday, my savings and investments hit $100,000 for the first time. This actually went beyond my expectations for what these investments could have done. By the end of 2020, my savings and investments did in fact hit $150,000. That was just enough money for me to leave my job without a plan and allow me to have some breathing room and some time to figure out next steps. Looking back on my journey towards the first $100,000, there were three major catalysts that helped me get there by my mid-20s. The first two we already mentioned. Number one is I didn't have any student debt because I paid for my tuition out of pocket with my internship money when I was in school. The next one was living with my parents, and I know that this is something that's really dependent on each individual situation. But if there's any way to cut expenses to the best of your ability, do it. And the last major catalyst is investing. If I had just saved and hoarded my cash, it would have taken a lot longer to get to the first 100,000. In Robert Kiyosaki's best-selling book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, literally, the first rule of rich people is that the rich don't work for money, because money works for you. If you're saving money, you have to look at your money not in terms of savings, but in terms of capital. Capital is the money that you have to invest. By doing this, you're essentially letting the wonders of compound interest take over, and essentially that means your money is working for you. So if you think about it, the formula to building wealth is actually quite simple. Make money, cut expenses, save, then invest. Repeat the cycle and your money will compound. And I know it's simple to say, but not as simple in practice. In real life, it requires a lot of discipline and it requires a lot of sacrifice. Not to mention that in order to make more income, which is the first step to this equation, it means you need to deliver in adding value. And that's why I emphasize that the most important variable to this equation is knowing your why. This is ultimately the thing that gets you through those times where you have to be very, very disciplined. My why towards the first 100K was always wanting to provide myself with more flexibility in how I spend my time. Also, just know that you can never have enough money. Once I crossed the first $100,000 mark, well, there's always $200,000 and $500,000 and even $1 million. But the important thing is now I have more flexibility in terms of how I want to spend my time and the type of work that I want to do. And to me, that's priceless. And frankly, you don't have to be a millionaire to have that choice. And having said that, if you found value in this video, make sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. I'm Caitlin, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.